Hi, I'm Rob Fantinatto, and I'm the director and co-writer of I Dream of Wires. And I want to thank you very much for coming to watch the film. The first thing that we ever shot for this project happened back in November of 2010. So it was quite a long journey to get from that point to finally getting the film out to a wider audience. I always pictured that the film would be a very, very small documentary, mostly about enthusiasts who are getting back into this sort of thing. And I thought, I'll make a little project about this kind of scene and some of the obsessions around it. It was going to be a very low budget little project, and I thought I'd just self-release this thing and that would be the end. Until I met up with Solvent, otherwise known as Jason Am. Jason Am is a brilliant composer, musician, synth pop. I don't like to say the word revival. I feel that he's kind of responsible partially for continuing on with the tradition of synth pop in a very, very modern way, and I became a huge fan of his. And I thought it would be kind of interesting to see if I could somehow convince him to do the soundtrack to this film. So I proposed to Jason that, what if I got a bunch of modular equipment and we set you up into a studio for a week, and it would be like a little experiment. We'd set up a bunch of cameras and let you, create a soundtrack within a 1-week period. But over the course of doing that, we started chatting, and he kept giving me ideas about people to interview, and he was able to line up a lot of those interviews. And after a while, I thought, I asked him if he would like to maybe get more involved in the film, and he ended up becoming the producer of the film. And once the two of us were working on this thing, it started growing into a much bigger project than we expected. And I think once we were able to interview Trent Reznor, it suddenly dawned on me that this was going to be a much bigger project than I thought. So what I've learned about this resurgence of interest in the modular synthesizer is that it's definitely a reaction to the limitations of digital technology. All the sort of things that digital technology did for us that we thought was amazing has turned out to kind of over-smooth everything. A lot of the unpredictability of some of these instruments, which we used to think of as being flaws, we realize now that we're missing that. It's similar to what's going on with Instagram. When I started doing photography and I used to develop my own stuff, we were always sitting there trying to get rid of all the little dust marks on the negatives, and whenever we would enlarge pictures, we'd go in with brushes and try to paint away all the scratches and things. And what's interesting is, digital photography was like this fantastic thing where it was such a clean image. And I find it really interesting now that people are going to Instagram to use filters to try to get back that look of unpredictability, of instability. The fact that the grains on film are a random organic pattern, and that there's all kinds of plugins that people use in photography to try to simulate that. And I know, for example, there were a lot of modular synth simulation software programs that were available, plugins that you could use with your computer. And I think that turned on a lot of people who were curious about modular synths. And once they started using the software, I think they felt they would really love to get their hands on a real machine. And instead of using a mouse to track over a virtual knob, they would actually like to turn a real knob. And this is something that's kind of been missing from our culture, that everything has become virtualized. And so the modular synth is a chance to actually play with electricity directly. That you're working with things that are inherently unstable. There's a bit of, the unpredictability means that it's not just your input, but the synth is kind of talking back to you. It's a back and forth communication where it's almost playing you as much as you're playing it. You have to respond to it. And there's also something really interesting about the fact that these machines cannot remember the patches that you make. So every time you create a sound, it's a unique event. It's very, very difficult, the more complex your modular is, to get a sound back that maybe you had a week ago. So every sound becomes kind of a precious thing. I was aware of modular synthesizers mainly due to seeing them on the covers of records. By the time I was old enough to actually have a synthesizer, this was already when digital keyboards were starting to come in, and all the analog stuff like the Pro 1s and the Poly 6s were going for super cheap, and so I had bought a few things like that back in the early 80s. And I knew about modular synths mainly from seeing it on an episode of The Monkees. I recall seeing the cover of Switched on Bach, and I remember seeing a Buchla synth on the cover of a Morton Subotnick record. And so these things were very mysterious machines to me. I knew that they were the first synthesizers, but I never thought that I would ever get to see one or actually get to play one. So it's very exciting now that this technology has come back, and it's not just collectors who have these rare instruments and it's, it's a very niche thing. You can get yourself, like this machine here, a Euro rack-based system, and just get an empty frame and a couple of modules to start, and you can start playing with sound. And it's, it's not super cheap. It's not as cheap, obviously, as buying a plug-in, but this is the kind of instrument that, unlike a piece of software, it's never going to be out of date. This is a machine that you can hang on to forever. You can pass on to the next generation. As long as analog parts are still going to be around, and of course that's debatable, these machines can be repairable. They're not full of super fancy integrated circuits and things. These are all made mostly from discrete parts and can be rebuilt and fixed up just like the original modulars can, but in a much more affordable manner. I mean, a very, very simple modular synth back in the late 60s cost as much as a house, and you can get yourself a pretty decent Euro rack for way less than the cheapest car you could possibly get, or probably about the same you would pay for a really good electric guitar. So if you think modular synths are out of your reach, just find out what it costs to get yourself like a really good guitar and an amp, and you'll find you could get yourself a machine for about the same price. So again, I want to thank you for taking the time out to come and see the film, and I want to encourage you to visit idreamofwires.org, where Jason and I have put up many, many hours of extended interviews with lots of interesting people, and there's photographs and all kinds of goodies out there that you can enjoy, and hopefully this is a start of an exploration for you. I hope the film inspires some of you to maybe get into modular synths, but at the same time I hope it doesn't set you off on a catastrophic journey that's going to end in your financial ruin. So be careful out there, because this stuff can be very addictive. Thanks again, and I hope you enjoy the film.